I used to think the desert was honest, not nice, not kind, just honest. It tells you what it is: heat, distance, silence. A place that doesn't care if you're strong or weak, smart or stupid. You respect it, you plan, you bring water, you watch your tires and your fuel, and you don't pretend you can outwill physics. That's what I believed. I also believed people were the only real danger out there. I was wrong about the second part, and I'm not sure about the first anymore. This started with a job that should have been routine. I do recoveries for a small tow outfit that takes calls the bigger companies don't want. Lost hikers, stuck tourists, broken down rigs on back roads. Sometimes it's salvage. Sometimes it's just hauling someone's ego back to pavement. That week had been slow. Late summer, still hot enough to melt the glue off your dash, but not peak season for out-of-towners. My boss, Daryl, asked if I wanted a run for some extra cash. A private guy with a satellite phone had called his cousin. Cousin called Daryl, and Daryl called me. Old mining road, Daryl said. Somewhere past the Joshua Flats. Guy says his buddy's truck died. They're walking out. Thinks he knows where they are. Wants someone to go find the truck before it gets stripped. Stripped by who? I asked. People who strip trucks, he said. Or coyotes, or weather. He'll pay cash. You want it or not? I wanted it. I just paid rent. My brakes were shot, and my girlfriend had been hinting about leaving if I didn't stop working so many odd hours. I told myself it was one run, in and out. The client's name was Nolan. He met me at a gas station on the edge of town with a thick envelope and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was in his mid-30s, clean clothes, nice boots that had never seen real dust. He had a white SUV with tinted windows and a little antenna on the roof. He shook my hand like he was closing a deal. "Appreciate you coming," he said. "No problem," I said. "Where's the truck?" He pulled out a folded map that looked like it had been printed from an online satellite view and scribbled on. He pointed at a spot that might as well have been blank paper. "Old Access Road. There's a wash, then a rise, then a split. You take the left fork. My buddy said there's a line of rusted barrels. Truck should be near there." Why didn't he just give you coordinates? Nolan's jaw tightened. His phone died. He's not exactly prepared. Did he get out? Yeah. He and the other guy started walking. They should be back by now. The way he said "other guy" made it sound like a thing in the trunk. I asked the usual questions. How long ago did they break down? Did anyone call for help? What's the make and model? Any injuries? He answered without much detail. The truck was a late model pickup, dark color. They'd gone out to see something. Engine died. They couldn't get it started. No injuries. They'd walked toward the highway. I tried to get names. "My buddy's name is Owen," Nolan said. "The other guy is just a friend." That was odd. Most people are more specific when they're paying cash to send someone into empty desert. But I'd done enough of these runs to know people hide things. Cheating spouses, stolen cars, drugs, illegal guns, sometimes just embarrassment. I wasn't a cop. I was a tow guy. I got paid to haul metal, not judge. I told Nolan I'd call him if I found the truck. He nodded and told me to be careful, like he meant it. The sun was already low when I left town. I took my old wrecker, a beat-up flatbed with a winch that had saved me more than once. I had water, a first aid kit, a spare tire, 2 full gas cans, and a bag of tools. I carried a pistol too. Not because I wanted trouble, but because I'd seen what desperate people do when they've been out there too long. The paved road turned to dirt, then to hard-packed sand. The landscape flattened out. Low scrub, distant hills that looked close until you drove for an hour, and they were still far. The radio went fuzzy, and then silent. My phone lost signal. That was normal. You don't go out there for the bars. I followed Nolan's directions. The access road was barely a road. 2 tire tracks weaving through rocks and sand, sometimes disappearing in a wash and picking up again on the other side. After a while, I saw the rusted barrels. They were half buried, sun-bleached and dented, like old drum cans someone had used for target practice. The pickup wasn't right there, but I found fresh tracks leading off toward a shallow ravine. I eased the wrecker forward, slow enough not to blow a tire on hidden rock. The air smelled like hot dust and creosote, the kind of smell that clings to your clothes and hair. Then I saw the truck. It was a dark blue pickup, nose down in a dip as if it had tried to cross and didn't make it. The driver's door was open. The interior light was on, a weak glow in the fading day. At first I felt relief. Trucks don't walk away. Find the truck, hook it, haul it, get paid. Then I noticed the back window was shattered. I parked the wrecker a short distance away and stepped out with my flashlight. The air was quiet. No wind, not even insects. The silence felt thick, like it was pressing against my ears. I called out, "Hello, tow service." No answer. I walked toward the pickup, keeping my eyes on the door and the shadowed cab. I could see something dark on the sand near the open door. When I got closer, I realized it wasn't oil. It was blood. Not a small smear. A pooled stain that had soaked into the sand and dried in dark patches, with streaks dragging away from it. My first thought was that someone had hurt themselves and crawled. A busted leg, a head wound, something like that. People bleed a lot in panic. Then I saw what the streaks led to. A few yards away, half tucked behind a low rock, was a man. He was on his side like he'd collapsed mid-step. His shirt was torn open, and the front of him was soaked. His skin looked gray under the flashlight. I stood there too long, staring, trying to make it not real. I moved closer, careful, and the smell hit me. Not just blood, something deeper, metal and rot. His eyes were open, dry. Dust had already started to settle on his face. The front of his throat was gone, not cut clean, torn. I swallowed hard and fought the urge to back away and run to my truck. I forced myself to check for life anyway. It was automatic, like muscle memory. I put 2 fingers to his neck, on the side that was still there. Nothing. The skin was cooling but not cold. He hadn't been dead long. I stepped back and scanned around with the flashlight. My heart was pounding, loud in my head. I said out loud, "Okay, okay." The words didn't help. This wasn't a snake bite. This wasn't heat stroke. This was murder. I looked at the pickup again. The shattered back window. The open door. The blood. Something had happened here and it wasn't an accident. I reached for my phone without thinking. No signal. I tried anyway, calling 911. It didn't connect. I walked back to the wrecker and grabbed the satellite messenger I kept for runs like this. It was old, bulky, but it worked if the sky was clear. I turned it on. It blinked, searching. Nothing. That made my stomach drop. I had never seen it fail out there. I held it up, walked a few steps, angled it, like that would change anything. Still nothing. The sky above me was wide and empty. Stars were starting to show. I told myself it could be a dead battery, but I'd charged it the night before. I checked the screen again. It didn't look dead. It looked like it couldn't find a signal. I didn't like that. I moved back toward the pickup because I had to. I couldn't just leave a body and drive away without trying to understand what I'd stumbled into. I took my pistol out and kept it low at my side. I'm not some tough guy. I don't walk around hoping to use it. Holding it made me feel a little less exposed. I approached the cab and shined the light inside. The seats were torn. Not just ripped. Shredded. Foam spilled out like guts. There was blood on the steering wheel, smeared like someone had gripped it while bleeding. The glove box was hanging open, and on the passenger seat there was a small canvas bag. It looked like a day pack, dusty, one strap broken. I reached in and grabbed it, pulling it out slowly. The bag was heavier than it should have been. I set it on the ground and unzipped it. Inside were rocks. At first that made no sense. Just a handful of dull, grayish stones. Then my flashlight caught the edge of one and it flashed like glass. They weren't stones. They were chunks of something that had been cut or broken. Smooth faces. Sharp corners. One piece had a faint pattern in it, like layers. I picked it up and turned it in my hand. It was cold, even though everything else out there held the day's heat. And it smelled wrong. Not like sulfur or chemicals, more like old pennies and damp earth. I put it back in the bag, zipped it up, and looked around again. There were tracks in the sand, lots of them. Some boot prints, some running, some dragging. And then there were other marks, long grooves, like something heavy had been pulled along the ground. They weren't straight. They curved and looped, as if whatever made them had moved in circles. I followed them with my light, and the beam caught on something pale. A bone. Not a small one. A long, thick bone half buried in sand, bleached white. It looked like it had been there a while. That told me the desert hadn't just killed someone today. It had kept secrets before. I turned back toward the body by the rock. I forced myself to look at his face again. He was older than I'd thought at first glance. Maybe 40. A little beard. Sunburned nose. I checked his pockets. It felt wrong, but I needed a name. A wallet. Something. His pants were stiff with dried blood. My fingers shook as I reached in. I found a wallet and opened it. His driver's license said, Owen Hart. That name hit me in the chest. Nolan had said his buddy's name was Owen. So that was Nolan's buddy. which meant Nolan had sent me here knowing his buddy was missing. Or dead. I looked back at the access road, the way I'd come. The sky was darker now. The desert around me was a bowl of shadow. I didn't like the idea of driving that road at night, but I liked the idea of staying there even less. I decided to leave. Not after hooking the truck. Not after collecting the cash. I decided to get myself back to pavement, get signal, call the cops, and let them handle it. I walked fast to the wrecker, climbed in, and started the engine. The headlights cut across the ravine, lighting the pickup and the blood-stained sand. I put the wrecker in gear. The engine revved. The truck didn't move. I tried again. The wheels spun in place like I was stuck in mud. But I wasn't stuck. The ground was firm. I leaned out and looked at the rear tires. They were on the sand, normal. I got out and walked to the back. Something was wrapped around the axle. At first I thought it was rope or a chain. Then my flashlight showed me it was a strip of skin. Not leather. Skin. It was stretched tight and twisted, and it had hair on one side. I stumbled back and almost fell. My stomach turned. I gagged, hard. The strip was thick and fresh, still wet in places. It had been wrapped there recently. Someone had been under my truck while I was standing by the pickup. I raised the pistol and spun around, sweeping the flashlight across the dark. Nothing moved. No footsteps. No rustle. Just that heavy silence. I climbed back into the cab, slammed the door, and locked it. My hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. I tried the satellite messenger again. Still nothing. I tried the truck radio. Static. I tried my phone. Dead bars. A calm voice in my head said, "You need to leave now. Not later. Not after you figure it out. Now." But the wrecker wouldn't move with whatever was wrapped around the axle. It might snap the line. It might ruin the rear end. Worse, it might drag something that would tear open and tangle. I needed to cut it. I didn't want to. I grabbed a long-handled cutter from behind the seat. I kept the pistol in my lap. I got out again, because there was no other choice. The air felt cooler now, but my skin was hot. I crouched near the rear tire, trying to keep my body low, trying not to imagine someone standing behind me. My flashlight shook as I aimed it at the strip. It looked like it had been cut with a jagged edge, ripped from something. I took the cutters and started snipping. The skin resisted like rubber. When it finally gave, it snapped loose and slapped the ground. The smell hit me again. It wasn't just blood. It was a wet animal smell. I didn't look too closely at what it was. I didn't want to know. I stood and backed away, keeping my eyes on the dark around me. That's when I heard the first sound. Not a voice. A dry scrape, like something dragging across rock. It came from the ravine, near where Owen's body lay. My pulse hammered. I lifted the pistol and the flashlight. The beam swept over the sand, the rocks, the pickup. And then it caught movement. Something low to the ground, moving behind the pickup. At first I thought it was an animal, a coyote, a big dog. But it moved wrong. It didn't walk. It slid, like its belly was pressed to the ground. I couldn't see its head at first. Then it came into the open. It was a man, or what used to be. His legs were there, but twisted under him as if they didn't work. His arms pulled him forward. His hands were raw, scraped to bone in places. His shirt was gone. His chest was ripped open, and something inside him moved, like breathing wasn't the right word for it. He lifted his head and I saw his face. It was Owen, or close enough that it made me dizzy. Except the throat. The missing throat. He shouldn't have been alive. He dragged himself toward me, leaving a dark line in the sand. I took a step back, then another. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. He made a sound that wasn't speech, a wet, broken exhale. His eyes locked onto mine. They weren't dead eyes. They looked focused, like he recognized me. I raised the pistol. I didn't want to shoot him. I didn't want to shoot anyone. But he kept coming. He reached toward me with fingers that had no nails. I fired. The shot cracked the silence and echoed off the distant hills. Owen jerked, rolled, and kept dragging. The bullet hadn't stopped him. I fired again, aiming for his head. This time he dropped face first into the sand. He didn't move. I stood there, shaking, ears ringing. The smell of gunpowder mixed with hot dust. For a second I thought that was it. Then behind him, something else shifted. Something darker. It was under the pickup. Not the wrecker. The pickup. A shadow that wasn't just absence of light. It slid out from beneath the frame like oil. My flashlight beam hit it and seemed to dull. It didn't have a clear shape. It was thicker in some spots, thin in others. It moved like a slow wave. Then it climbed. Up the side of the pickup, over the open door, into the cab. The interior light flickered. I heard a sound like tearing cloth. My body froze. I had no reason to think anything was in that cab, but the sound made me picture it, like something was making itself comfortable. I backed toward the wrecker without taking my eyes off the pickup. My foot hit a rock and I almost fell. I caught myself and kept moving. I didn't run. Running in the desert at night is how you die. You trip. You twist an ankle. You panic. I moved fast, controlled, and got to the driver's door. I jumped in, slammed it, locked it. I turned the key and the engine roared. The headlights swept over the pickup again. The interior light was still on. I saw the shadow against the windshield. It was pressed to the glass like a person leaning forward, but no face. Just a dark thickness. I put the wrecker in gear and hit the gas. This time it moved. The tires threw sand. The truck lurched forward and climbed out of the dip, bouncing hard. My teeth clacked. I didn't care about the suspension. I aimed for the tracks leading back. The road was barely visible, but the pale sand showed where tires had been. I drove fast enough to be reckless, and slow enough not to flip. In the mirror, the pickup got smaller. Then I saw headlights. Not mine. Coming from the direction of the barrels. A vehicle was approaching. Relief hit me so hard my eyes stung. Someone else out there. Someone with a working radio. Someone I could flag down. I slowed and flashed my lights. The other vehicle slowed too. As it got closer, I realized it was Nolan's white SUV. He pulled up beside me and rolled his window down. His face was calm. Too calm. "What happened?" he asked. I stared at him. My throat felt tight. "Your buddy's dead," I said. "There's a body back there. And something else. We need to call the cops." Nolan nodded slowly, like I'd told him the weather. "I know," he said. That made my skin crawl. "You knew?" He looked past me, toward the dark where the pickup sat. "He wasn't supposed to die like that," he said. "He got careless." My hands tightened on the wheel. "What are you talking about?" Nolan's eyes returned to mine. "You found the bag, right?" I didn't answer. He smiled a little. "You did. Okay. What is it?" He leaned closer to his window. "Something valuable. Something old. People have been looking for it. Owen thought he could take it without paying." "Paying who?" He shrugged. "The desert. The people who live in it." "There aren't people out here," I said. Nolan's smile faded. "That's what everyone thinks." I felt a cold wash of anger and fear. "You sent me out here," I said. "You used me." He lifted both hands slightly, like he was calming an animal. "I needed someone who didn't know what they were walking into. Someone who wouldn't ask too many questions." "I'm leaving," I said. Nolan's eyes flicked to my back seat. "You can't." I glanced back without thinking. Something moved behind my seat. A dark ripple in the corner. I'd thought it was my jacket. It wasn't. It rose like smoke and pressed itself against the rear window from the inside. My breath stopped. Nolan watched me with a look that was almost pity. "It follows the thing," he said. "You touched it. You're marked now." I snapped my head back toward him. "What do you mean follows?" He glanced toward the road ahead, toward town. "You can drive. It'll ride with you. It doesn't like to be left alone." I swallowed hard. "Get out of my way." Nolan didn't move his SUV. His voice stayed even. "If you go back to town, it'll feed. It'll find warm places. People. You don't want that." I stared at him, trying to find the angle, trying to decide if he was crazy. Then the thing in my cab shifted again. The interior of my wrecker got colder. Not the normal desert night cooling. Colder, like opening a freezer. My breath fogged, faint but visible. I'd never seen that out there. I said, "What do you want?" Nolan's jaw tightened. "I want the bag. I want the pieces. They're worth more than you can imagine." "And if I give it to you?" He looked at the back seat, then back at me. "Then maybe it'll stay with me. Maybe it'll let you go." Maybe. That word hung there. I thought about the body in the ravine. Owen's throat torn, his chest ripped. I thought about my girlfriend asleep back in town. I thought about my neighbors, kids riding bikes, people walking dogs. If what Nolan said was true, I couldn't just drive away with this thing. but trusting Nolan felt like stepping off a cliff. I made a choice that still makes me sick. I nodded. "Fine," I said. "Take it." Nolan's expression eased, like he'd expected that. "Good," he said. "Throw it out the window." I reached for the bag on the passenger floor. My fingers touched the canvas. The cold was stronger there. I unzipped it part way and saw the dark, glassy chunks. They didn't look like rock anymore. They looked like teeth. Flat shards, edges sharp. One piece had a curve that made my stomach tighten. I didn't want to touch them again. I grabbed the bag by the strap and shoved it out the driver's window toward Nolan. It landed in the sand between our vehicles. Nolan opened his door and stepped out. He moved slowly, careful, like he was approaching a wild animal. He bent and picked up the bag. For a second, nothing happened. Then the air changed. A pressure, like a storm coming. The thing in my back seat surged. The cab went dark for a heartbeat, like the lights had been smothered. I heard a sound behind me, a wet snap. I twisted in my seat. Nolan screamed, not a long horror movie scream, a raw, shocked scream that cut off quickly. The shadow had poured out of my cab and across the gap like a wave. It hit Nolan's chest and wrapped around his head. He dropped the bag. He clawed at his face with both hands, stumbling backward. The shadow tightened. His hands came away slick. He tried to run, but his feet tangled. He fell hard on his side. The shadow dragged him across the sand like he weighed nothing. He left a trail. Not just blood. Something darker, thicker. His body jerked once. Then it went still. The shadow didn't leave him. It sank into him, like water soaking into cloth. For a moment, Nolan's chest rose. Then his mouth opened, and something inside him moved. His eyes snapped open and found mine. I couldn't breathe. He pushed himself up on his arms, the same way Owen had, dragging. His legs didn't work. His throat was intact, but his voice came out wrong. A wet, scraping sound. He reached for the bag, for the shards. I shoved my door open and stumbled out, pistol raised. I fired at his head. The shot kicked his skull back. He dropped. I fired again. Silence. No movement. My hands shook so hard the pistol rattled. The bag lay in the sand between us. The shards glinted in my flashlight. The air around them looked thicker, like heat shimmer but cold. I didn't understand any of it, but I understood one thing. That bag was the hook. That thing followed it. And if I left it there, it would have it. If it had it, it would keep feeding. Maybe out there, maybe in town. I didn't know. I just knew I couldn't let it keep riding with me. And I couldn't let it find other people. The desert felt huge and empty. But it wasn't empty. Not anymore. I grabbed the bag. The cold bit into my palm like dry ice. I almost dropped it. My skin went numb. I clenched harder, gritting my teeth. The shards inside shifted with a soft clack. I ran back to the wrecker and threw the bag onto the flatbed behind the cab. Then I climbed in and slammed the door. I turned the key. The engine started. I floored it. I didn't care about Nolan's SUV. I didn't care about Owen's pickup. I didn't care about anything except getting away from that ravine. In the mirror, Nolan's body lay twisted, not moving. But I didn't trust stillness anymore. I drove until the road smoothed out and the wrecker stopped bouncing. The headlights showed the twin tracks stretching ahead. My mind kept replaying the way the shadow had moved. It had been in my cab. It had poured out. It had used Nolan like a glove. If it could do that to him, it could do it to anyone. I kept checking the mirror for movement on the flatbed. The bag sat there like a normal bag, but the air around it looked wrong. The stars overhead were bright, but the desert felt darker than it should. At some point, I realized I wasn't going toward the highway. The tracks had split, and I'd taken the wrong fork. I hadn't seen it in the panic. Now the road narrowed and dipped into a wash. The walls rose on either side, low cliffs of packed dirt. If something followed me, I'd be trapped. I slowed and tried to turn around. The wrecker's wheels slid in loose sand. The back end fishtailed. I corrected, too hard. The front tire hit a rock. The steering jerked. The wrecker lurched and dropped into a deeper rut. The engine whined. The tires spun. Stuck. I slammed the wheel in frustration and then froze, because the cab was cold again. That freezer cold. I looked in the mirror. The bag was gone. My heart stopped. I twisted and looked over my shoulder through the rear window. The flatbed was empty. The straps I kept there were still coiled. No bag, no shards. It wasn't possible. I hadn't stopped. I hadn't hit anything hard enough to throw it off. I got out, flashlight in hand, pistol in the other. The night air was still. The wash walls blocked the horizon. I swept the light around. The sand behind the flatbed was disturbed. Drag marks. Long grooves leading away, not toward the road, toward the wall. The drag marks went right up the vertical dirt and stopped. Like whatever had dragged the bag had climbed straight up. I shined the light higher. At the top of the wall, the beam caught a shape. A man standing there. For a second I felt relief again. Stupid relief. Someone. Help. Then I saw the way he stood. Too still. Arms hanging. Head slightly tilted. He was holding something. The bag. I called out, "Hey, stop! That's mine!" My voice echoed off the wash walls. The figure didn't move. I climbed the side of the wash, boots slipping in loose dirt. Halfway up, the figure turned. The flashlight beam hit his face. It was Nolan. But it wasn't. His skin looked stretched, like it didn't fit right. His eyes were open too wide. His mouth hung slightly open, and inside it was black. Not shadow. Black like a hole. He raised the bag in one hand, slow. Then he stepped back and dropped out of sight. I scrambled up, breathing hard, and hauled myself over the edge. The top of the wash was flat desert again, empty. No Nolan, no footprints, no bag. Just scrub and sand and rocks. The drag marks ended at the lip, as if the bag had been pulled up and then erased. I stood there, flashlight shaking. and the thought hit me that I'd made a mistake. I'd tried to get rid of it by giving it to Nolan, and it had killed him. I'd tried to carry it away, and it had taken it. It didn't want to be traded. It didn't want to be hauled. It wanted something else. I climbed back down into the wash and got in the wrecker. The engine was still running, tires spinning gently because I'd left it in gear. I shifted to neutral. I sat there and tried to think. Stuck in a wash, no signal, 2 bodies behind me. Something out there that could move like smoke and wear a man. I wasn't going to outfight it. I needed a plan that didn't involve bullets. I'd seen enough desert to know old mine sites were everywhere. Shafts, pits, caves. People go poking around, fall in, disappear. That's how you get a ghost story. That's how you get a news brief that nobody reads. Nolan had said it was valuable. Old. People looking for it. I wondered if it was something taken from a mine. Something that wasn't supposed to be on the surface. I didn't have proof, just fear, but fear will make you connect dots. I thought about the rusted barrels, the old bone, the way the pickup had been torn inside. Something had been here before. Something had fed before. Maybe it was tied to a place. Maybe the shards belonged somewhere. Maybe the desert was honest in one way. If you take what isn't yours, it takes something back. I cut the engine and climbed out again. The wash was quiet, but I could feel that pressure in the air, like something waiting. I used the winch to pull the wrecker forward a few feet, inching out of the rut. It took time. Sweat ran down my back even in the night, because stress does that. Eventually I got free. I drove out of the wash and onto higher ground. I didn't know where I was exactly, but I could see a dark line of hills in the distance. I picked a direction and drove. The road faded. I kept going anyway, aiming for anything that looked man-made. After a long stretch, my headlights caught something that made my stomach lurch. A car. Not Nolan's SUV. Not the pickup. A small sedan, older, sitting crooked in the sand. Its doors were open. The headlights were off. The interior was stripped, and there were stains on the ground. I stopped the wrecker and got out, because I was already in it too deep. The sedan looked like it had been there for months. Dust coated it, tires half sunk, but the stains on the sand looked newer. I walked around it, flashlight sweeping. There were footprints. Lots of them. Boots and sneakers, and drag marks again, leading away toward a cluster of low buildings in the distance. I hadn't seen them at first because they blended into the dark. Old shacks, maybe an abandoned camp. My skin prickled. I didn't want to go closer, but if there was any chance of finding a working radio, a landline, anything, it would be there. I drove the wrecker toward the buildings. As I got closer, I saw it was an old mining camp, a few collapsed structures, a larger building that might have been an office, and a metal tower leaning like a crooked finger. I parked and stepped out. The air smelled different here, less creosote, more dust and old wood. I heard a faint sound, not from far away, from inside the buildings. A low scraping, like someone dragging something across a floor. I held the pistol tighter. I walked to the largest building. The door hung open on one hinge. I pushed it the rest of the way with my foot. The inside was black. My flashlight beam cut through and caught dust motes. There were old desks, overturned chairs, papers stuck to the floor. And there was a smell, not just old, not just stale. A smell like wet meat left in a hot car. I fought the urge to vomit. I moved deeper, slow, scanning. On the floor near the back wall was a pile. At first I thought it was clothes. Then I saw a hand, a human hand, fingers curled. The pile was a body, then another. Then I realized it was more than bodies. It was pieces, arms, legs, a torso split open, not cleanly cut, torn apart. The floor around it was dark and sticky. My flashlight shook so much the beam danced. I backed away, but my boot caught on something. I looked down. A phone. A cracked smartphone. Screen smashed. I bent and picked it up with 2 fingers. No power. It was useless. I turned toward the door, ready to get out. And then I saw movement in the corner. A figure crouched behind a desk. A person. Alive. My chest tightened. "Hey," I said, voice low. "Hey, are you okay?" The figure didn't answer. I stepped closer. The flashlight beam hit his face. A young guy, maybe 20. Dirt on his cheeks, blood on his shirt. His eyes were wide and glossy. He stared at me like I was another thing coming to tear him apart. "It's here," he whispered. "Who are you?" I asked. He swallowed. "Kyle." "Where did you come from?" He pointed weakly toward the sedan outside. "We got lost. Me and my sister, and 2 friends." His voice broke. "They're gone." I didn't look back at the pile. I didn't need to. "I'm getting you out of here," I said. Kyle shook his head fast, panic rising. "No, it follows. It follows the pieces." My stomach dropped. "You saw it?" He nodded, trembling. "We found it in a hole, like glass, like teeth. We thought it was some kind of mineral. My friend put it in his backpack." I felt a cold dread settle in my bones. "Same thing." "You still have it?" I asked. Kyle's eyes flicked upward, toward the ceiling. "It took it," he whispered. "It took him first. It pulled him into the sand like water. Then it wore him." My skin crawled. Kyle grabbed my arm suddenly, fingers digging in. "Don't let it leave here," he said. "It likes roads. It likes cars. It wants to go where people are." I pulled my arm free gently. "We're leaving now. Get up." Kyle's legs shook as he stood. He looked past me, toward the dark hallway leading deeper into the building. His mouth opened. I turned. The hallway was darker than it should have been. Not just lack of light. A thick darkness that seemed to swallow my beam. The air got cold. Kyle let out a small, broken sound. "Run," he said. I grabbed his wrist and pulled him toward the door. We moved fast, stumbling over debris. Behind us, the scraping sound got louder, like something dragging itself across the floor. We burst out into the night. The desert air felt warm compared to that cold inside. We ran for the wrecker. Kyle tripped, and I yanked him up. We reached the driver's side. I shoved him into the passenger seat and climbed in. I turned the key. The engine coughed, then started. The headlights lit the camp. In the beam, I saw something moving between the shacks. A man, or a shape wearing a man. It was Nolan again, dragging himself across the sand, but his body looked thinner now, pulled tight. Behind him, something darker flowed. It wasn't just one shadow. It was a trail, like it was shedding pieces of itself. Kyle made a choking sound. That's it. I put the wrecker in gear and hit the gas. The truck lurched forward, the tires through sand. We tore out of the camp. The road was barely there, but I followed the path back toward open desert. In the mirror, the camp shrank, but the darkness didn't. It moved faster than it should have been able to. Not running, sliding, closing the distance. Kyle clutched the dashboard, knuckles white. "It can't cross running water," he said suddenly. I shot him a look. "What?" He swallowed. "My sister said she read something. Old stories. People used to keep it in the ground. If it came out, they'd drive it back with water." "There's no water out here," I snapped. Kyle's voice went thin. "There's a tank at the old ranch. We passed it. Big metal tank." I didn't know if he was making it up, but it was something. And the darkness was getting closer. I drove hard, following the faint tracks Kyle pointed out, cutting across flats. The wrecker bounced over rocks. The suspension groaned. The sky ahead was lighter near the horizon, not from sunrise, just from distant town glow. I saw a structure in the dark, a windmill, then a fence line, then the outline of a water tank. I slammed the brakes and turned in. The wrecker skidded, corrected, and rolled up near the tank. It was a big metal cylinder on legs, rusted but intact. A pipe ran down into a trough. There was a hand pump attached. Kyle looked at it with wild hope. "We can fill the trough," he said. I didn't wait. I jumped out and ran to the pump. I grabbed the handle and started pumping. At first nothing came, then a cough of air, then a spurt, then water. It splashed into the trough clear and cold. I pumped harder. Kyle stumbled out and helped, grabbing the handle with me. Behind us, the air went cold again. I didn't turn around. I kept pumping. The trough filled slowly, too slowly. Kyle's breath came in ragged gasps. "More," he said. I pumped until my arms burned. Water rose to the lip. Then it spilled over, pouring onto the sand. It soaked in fast, disappearing. But for a moment, the ground was wet. The cold behind us paused. I turned. The shadow was at the edge of the wet sand. It pressed forward and then recoiled, like it had hit a wall. It wavered. It tried again. The wet sand hissed, not loud, but enough that I heard it. The shadow pulled back. Kyle cried out, half laugh, half sob. "It works," he said. But the wet patch was shrinking fast as the desert drank. I looked around desperately. There were old hoses coiled near the tank. A spigot. I ran to it, yanked the hose free, and twisted the valve. At first, nothing. Then water surged. The hose jerked in my hands. I aimed it at the ground and sprayed. A fan of water splashed across sand, darkening it. Steam rose faintly in the cool night. The shadow stayed back. It moved along the edge, searching for a dry path. I kept spraying, widening the wet barrier. Kyle stood behind me, shaking. "Where's your sister?" I asked without looking at him. Kyle's voice cracked. "Inside, the house. She hid." My stomach dropped again. I glanced toward the ranch house, a low building with broken windows. The door was closed. "How long ago?" "I don't know," he said. "We ran. She couldn't keep up." I swore. The shadow shifted. It pulled back farther, away from the water. For a moment I thought we'd won. Then I saw it. On the other side of the wet sand, near the fence line, a figure stood. A man. Not dragging. Standing. He was inside the dry area. How? He stepped forward. The light from my wrecker hit his face. It was Owen. His throat was still torn, but he was upright. The shadow didn't need to cross the water. It could send a body around. Kyle made a sound like a whimper. Owen lifted his head and opened his mouth. No words. Just that black hole inside. He walked toward the house, toward where Kyle's sister was. I aimed the pistol and fired. The shot hit Owen's chest. He staggered, kept walking. I fired again. He flinched, slowed, and then kept going. It wasn't pain driving him. It was something else. I ran after him, leaving the hose spraying onto sand. Kyle shouted behind me. I sprinted toward the house, boots slipping. Owen reached the door and slammed his shoulder into it. The door splintered. He forced his way inside. I hit the doorway a second later. Inside was darkness and old air. My flashlight beam swept across a dusty living room. Owen moved toward a hallway. I chased. Kyle's sister screamed. The sound was high and raw. It made my blood run cold. I rounded the corner into a back room. A girl was pressed into the corner, hands up, face streaked with dirt. Owen reached for her. His fingers spread. I grabbed his arm. The skin under my hand felt wrong. Cold and slick, like touching a dead fish. He turned his head toward me. His eyes were empty now. Not dead, empty. Like windows with no room behind them. He swung his other arm. His hand hit my face. Not a punch, a slap with weight. My vision flashed white. I stumbled but didn't fall. I slammed the pistol against his skull, hard. He didn't react. He grabbed my wrist. His grip was crushing. Bones in my hand popped. Pain shot up my arm. I screamed involuntary. He pulled me toward him. His mouth opened wider. That black hole inside seemed to stretch. It wasn't breath I felt. It was suction. like the air was being pulled out of the room. The girl cried. I kicked Owen in the knee. His leg buckled. He still didn't let go. I shoved my free hand into his torn throat without thinking. Pure panic. My fingers sank into something wet and cold. He jerked back. His grip loosened. I yanked my wrist free and staggered away. I fired point blank into his head. This time the back of his skull blew out. He fell. His body hit the floor hard and went still. The room was silent except for my ragged breathing and the girl's sobs. I stood there, staring at Owen's ruined head, and felt nothing for a second. Then my stomach flipped and I vomited onto the dusty floor. Kyle's sister was still alive. That was all that mattered. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand, smearing blood and dirt. Get up, I told her. Now. She nodded fast, eyes wide. We ran out of the house. Kyle met us outside, grabbing his sister and pulling her close. He looked at me like I was both savior and monster. The hose was still spraying. The wet barrier had spread. The shadow stayed back, hovering at the edge. But it didn't feel defeated. It felt patient. It moved along the fence line like it was looking for another way in. I realized then that we couldn't stand there forever. The water tank would run out. The pump would fail. Our arms would give. And the desert would drink whatever we poured. We have to go, I said. Kyle shook his head. It'll follow. I looked at the wet sand, the hose, the tank. Maybe not if we leave it something, I said. I didn't want to say what I meant. Kyle's sister, her voice thin, asked, "What does it want?" I looked at the dark edge where the shadow waited. "Meat," I said. "Bodies. Warm ones." Kyle swallowed hard. I thought about Nolan, Owen, the pile of pieces in the mining office. It wasn't random. It wasn't just killing. It was collecting. It was making more tools. More bodies to wear. My mind went back to the bag of shards. The thing followed the pieces. It needed them. If we could trap the pieces somewhere, maybe the thing would stay with them. Maybe it was tied to them. But the bag was gone. Taken. Or maybe it had never left. Maybe it was nearby, hidden, waiting. I searched the ground with my flashlight. Near the edge of the wet sand, I saw something glint. A shard, half buried, like a tooth. The sight made my throat tighten. It was here. The pieces were here. And the shadow was here because of them. I stepped closer, careful not to cross the wet line. The shard lay just inside the dry sand. I couldn't reach it without stepping into the area the shadow could reach. Kyle watched me, shaking. I grabbed the hose and sprayed farther out, pushing the wet barrier forward. The shadow recoiled, sliding back. For a moment, the shard was inside the wet zone. I lunged forward and grabbed it. Cold stabbed my fingers. I almost dropped it, but I clenched and pulled back. The shadow surged forward again as the wet sand began to dry. Kyle's sister cried out. I shoved the shard into my pocket, even though it burned like ice. "We need a place to put it," I said. Kyle looked around wildly. "A hole. A mine. Back in the camp. No, I said. Not there. Too many bodies. Too close to town. Kyle's sister whispered. There was a shaft near the windmill. We saw it. I remembered the leaning tower at the mining camp. There had been a dark pit nearby. If we could get the pieces into a deep hole and flood the top, maybe we could seal it. It was a desperate idea, but desperate was all we had. I told Kyle to stay with his sister and keep the hose going. He stared at me. You're going back? I nodded. You'll die, he said. Maybe, I said. But if I don't, you will. I ran to the wrecker and grabbed a coil of chain and a heavy steel box I used for tools. The box had a lid that latched. I also grabbed a sledgehammer. Kyle shouted something, but I didn't listen. I drove the wrecker back toward the mining camp as fast as I could, following the tracks we'd made. The cold in my pocket pulsed with each bump. It felt like something was tapping from the inside. Not a sound, a sensation, like a warning. When the camp came into view, it looked smaller than it had before. Less like a place, more like a trap. I parked near the leaning tower. The headlights lit the sand. I saw the shaft near the windmill, just like Kyle had said. A round hole lined with old timber, half collapsed. It breathed cold air. I could feel it. I pulled the steel box out and carried it to the edge. My pocket burned where the shard sat. I took it out. In the headlight beam, it looked almost translucent. Layers inside, like thin ice. It was too smooth to be natural. I put it in the steel box. Then I looked around. The camp was silent, but the silence felt alert. Like eyes. I knew the shard wasn't the only piece. There were more. If the thing had taken the bag, it had them, which meant it was nearby. I didn't have time to search, so I did the only thing I could think of. I used myself as bait. I shouted into the dark, "Come on!" My voice sounded small. I shouted again, "I have it." The air shifted. Cold rolled across the sand. The darkness between the shacks thickened. And then, in the headlight beam, Nolan appeared. Not dragging this time. Walking. His body moved stiffly like joints didn't work right. His head was tilted. His eyes were too wide. He carried the canvas bag in one hand. The bag swung gently, like he was bringing groceries. I backed toward the shaft, steel box in my hands. Nolan stopped just outside the light. He looked at the box, then at me. His mouth opened. That black hole inside was deeper now. The air around my face pulled toward it. My ears popped. I felt dizzy. I gritted my teeth and forced my body to move. I set the steel box on the edge of the shaft. I opened the lid. The shard inside glinted. Nolan stepped forward. The bag in his hand bulged, heavy with more pieces. The shadow behind him flowed like a cape. It didn't rush. It didn't need to. It knew I was trapped. I grabbed the chain and swung it, not at Nolan's head, but at the bag. The chain struck canvas. The bag ripped. Shards spilled onto the sand. They clattered like glass. The shadow surged. It moved faster now, rushing to cover the spilled pieces. It didn't care about me. It cared about them. That was what I needed. I kicked the shards toward the shaft. My boot hit one and it skittered. Cold shot up my leg. Nolan lunged at me. His hands grabbed my shoulders. His grip was iron. He slammed me backward. I hit the ground hard. Sand filled my mouth. He leaned over me, mouth opening wider. The suction pulled at my face. I felt my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth. My eyes watered. I shoved the pistol into his ribs and fired. The shot punched through. He jerked, didn't fall. I fired again. His body sagged slightly, like strings loosening. The shadow behind him wavered. I used that moment to roll away. I got to my knees and crawled toward the shaft. The steel box sat at the edge, lid open. The shard inside was still there. The spilled shards on the sand were being gathered by the shadow, pulled toward Nolan like magnetized metal. I grabbed the steel box and shoved it over the edge. It fell into the shaft with a heavy clang, echoing down. Then I grabbed the sledgehammer and smashed the rotten timber lining. Boards cracked, dust burst. The edge of the shaft collapsed inward. More sand fell. I smashed again. The hole narrowed, not sealed, but choked. Nolan crawled toward me, dragging now, body leaking dark fluid. The shadow clung to him, pulling shards toward his chest. It wanted to reassemble. I realized something with a sick twist. The pieces weren't just bait. They were parts. Not of a rock, of a thing. And Nolan, Owen, the others, they were just meat to hold it. I swung the sledgehammer and brought it down on Nolan's head. Bone cracked. He twitched. I hit him again. His skull caved. I didn't stop until he was still. The shadow spilled off him like oil. It gathered over the shards on the sand. It tried to pull them together. I didn't give it time. I kicked the remaining shards toward the shaft. Some fell in. Some skittered away. The shadow chased them. I grabbed a shovel leaning against a shack and used it to scoop sand over the ones that didn't fall. I buried them fast, hands blistering. The shadow pressed against the sand, trying to find them. I ran to my wrecker, grabbed the gas can, and poured fuel over the disturbed area. Then I lit it. Flames rose, bright and hungry. The heat pushed back the cold. The shadow recoiled, thinning. It moved along the edge of the fire, searching. It didn't like flame. I kept the fire going, dumping more fuel. I didn't care about burning down the shacks. They were already dead. The fire spread across dry wood. Old boards caught fast. The leaning tower glowed. Smoke rose into the night. The shadow pulled back farther. For a moment I thought it might flee. Then it did something that made my blood turn to ice. It lifted, not like smoke, like it was choosing a shape. It rose above the flames and formed a rough outline. A tall figure, too tall. Long arms. A head that wasn't a head, just a thick mass. It stood there, watching me, not with eyes, with attention. I felt it on my skin, like standing near a high-voltage wire. The fire crackled. The shadow didn't cross it, but it didn't need to. It could wait. The desert is good at waiting. I backed away, heart hammering, and climbed into the wrecker. I drove. I didn't look back. I drove until the smoke was a faint smear behind me. I drove until the road appeared again, and then the highway. When I hit pavement and got signal, my phone exploded with missed calls. Daryl, my girlfriend, unknown numbers. I called 911 first. My voice sounded strange to my own ears as I told them there were bodies in the desert, a mining camp, a ravine. I gave rough directions. I told them about Nolan and Owen. I didn't tell them about the shadow. I couldn't. If you say that out loud, they put you in a different kind of car. I drove Kyle and his sister to the nearest town and waited for deputies to meet us. Kyle sat on the curb, head in his hands, shaking. His sister stared at the desert like she expected it to move. When the deputies arrived, they asked questions. Where were the others? What happened? Did we see anyone else? I told them what I could without sounding insane. There was an attack. Someone had killed people. We ran. We found the ranch tank. We got out. They asked about the wounds. I said it looked like an animal. That was the closest lie to the truth. They took our statements and sent search teams out at first light. I didn't sleep. I sat in my truck and watched the horizon. Kyle's sister slept for a while in the back seat, curled up like a kid. Kyle didn't sleep at all. He kept whispering, "It won't stay buried." When the sun came up, the desert looked normal again. Golden light, long shadows, that clean, open sky. It made me angry, like it was pretending. The deputies returned later, faces tight. They'd found the ravine. They'd found Owen's body. They'd found the pickup. They'd found the mining camp. But they hadn't found Nolan. And they hadn't found the pile of bodies I'd seen inside the office. The building was empty. Just dust, no blood, no pieces, no stink. They looked at me like I'd made it up. I insisted. Kyle insisted too, voice shaking. They listened, but their eyes said what their mouths didn't. Trauma, heat, shock. They found the burn marks at the camp, though. Charred wood, black sand, a scorched patch where I'd poured fuel. They couldn't explain that away. They asked if I'd started the fire. I said yes. I told them I'd panicked. That part was true. They asked why. I said I thought someone was still there, which was also true. They took my wrecker for evidence for a few days. When they returned it, they said nothing had been found inside. No strange residue, no bag, no shards. They asked about the skin wrapped around the axle. It wasn't there. The deputy looked at me like he was waiting for me to admit it was a prank. I didn't know what to say. I went home and tried to act normal. My girlfriend hugged me, relieved, and asked what happened. I told her I'd found a body and it shook me up. That was enough truth to keep her from pressing. For a few days, life moved like it always had. Work, heat, bills, but at night the cold came. Not in the air, in the house. A sudden chill in one room. A patch of floor that felt like ice under bare feet. a faint scraping sound from the hallway when the house was quiet. I kept telling myself it was stress, trauma, my mind replaying the desert. Then I found the shard. It was in my pocket still. I'd forgotten it. Or maybe I hadn't. Maybe I'd been avoiding it. I pulled my jeans off and it fell onto the bathroom tile with a soft clack. It didn't bounce. It just landed and sat there, cold. I stared at it until my vision blurred. I thought I'd thrown all the shards into the shaft. I thought I'd buried and burned the rest. But this one had been in my pocket. The hook. The mark. I picked it up with a towel and held it over the toilet like that would matter. The moment it left the tile, the bathroom air chilled. The mirror fogged. Not from heat, from cold. Behind me in the mirror, something dark shifted. I didn't turn. I couldn't. My throat tightened. The towel in my hand stiffened, like it was freezing. I forced myself to move. I dropped the shard into the toilet. It sank. I flushed. The water swirled. The shard didn't move. It stayed at the bottom like it was stuck. The water drained. The shard remained. The cold deepened. The light above the mirror flickered. I backed out of the bathroom. My girlfriend called from the bedroom. "You okay?" My mouth opened. I almost said no. Instead I said, "Yeah, just tired." I walked to the kitchen and grabbed a plastic container, the kind you store leftovers in. I filled it with water from the sink. The water ran warm. I took it back to the bathroom. The air in there was so cold my breath showed clearly. The mirror was fogged with frost at the edges. I didn't look at it. I poured the water into the toilet. The shard shimmered. The cold eased a little. I poured more. The shard lifted slightly, as if the water buoyed it. I reached in with the towel and grabbed it. The cold bit through the fabric, numbing my fingers. I shoved it into the plastic container and snapped the lid. The bathroom warmed immediately, like someone had turned on a heater. The mirror cleared. I looked. Nothing behind me. Just my own face, pale, eyes bloodshot. I carried the container outside. The night air was warm, normal. I walked to my truck and put the container on the passenger seat. I drove. I didn't tell my girlfriend where I was going. I couldn't. If I said it out loud, it would become real in a way I wasn't ready for. I drove back toward the desert, toward the place that had started all of it. I had one idea left. Not a good one. Just the only one. I drove to a supply store and bought 2 things. A cheap plastic kiddie pool and a bunch of bottled water. The cashier looked at me like I was insane. Maybe I was. I drove to the edge of the desert, to a dirt lot near where the access road began. I set up the kiddie pool on the ground and filled it with bottled water. My hands shook the whole time. Then I placed the plastic container with the shard in the center of the pool. The water around it chilled, tiny ripples forming. The air above it felt heavy. I took a shovel and started digging next to the pool. A deep hole, deep enough that I could bury the container. I dug until my arms ached. Then I lifted the container, still sitting in the water, and set it into the hole. I poured the pool water in after it. The hole filled with muddy water. I kept pouring until the pool was empty. Then I shoveled sand back in, packing it down. I emptied the rest of the bottled water over the mound. It soaked in. The desert drank. I stood there in the dark and waited for the cold. It didn't come. I waited longer. Nothing. No scraping. No pressure. Just wind. Finally. Brushing across scrub. I drove home with my hands clenched on the wheel. For a while it seemed like it worked. The house stayed warm. The nights were normal. Kyle and his sister left town. I don't know where they went. They didn't tell anyone. The deputies closed the case as a missing person and an animal attack. They called it a tragedy with a lot of unknowns. People in town talked about it for a month and then moved on. That's what towns do. But the desert doesn't move on. A few weeks later, Daryl got another call. A hiker missing near the Joshua Flats. A car found empty. Blood on the sand. He asked if I wanted the run. I told him no. He laughed and called me soft. He sent someone else. The next day, that guy didn't come back. They found his wrecker on the access road. Empty, engine cold. No sign of him. No tracks leading away. Just a long groove in the sand, like something heavy had been dragged. They brought in search teams. Dogs. Helicopters. Nothing. The desert kept him. That night my bathroom was cold again. I stood in the doorway and stared at the tile. No shard. No container. Nothing visible. But the cold was there. Deep. Patient. I could feel it in my teeth. I understood then what Nolan had meant when he said you don't want it to go where people are. It didn't need a road. It didn't need a car. It just needed a piece. And pieces don't stay buried forever. The desert shifts. Rain comes. Wind strips sand away. Things rise. Sometimes the desert gives back what it took. Not because it's kind, because it's honest. It shows you what happens when you dig where you shouldn't. I don't go out there anymore. I sold my wrecker. I moved to a different town. But the cold still visits sometimes. A patch of floor. A corner of a room. A glass of water that forms a thin skin of ice when the night is warm. And every time it happens, I think about the shaft, about the pieces clattering into the dark, about Nolan's eyes going empty, about Owen dragging himself across sand, about the pile of torn bodies that vanished like it had never been. I think about how easy it was for it to make the desert look normal again, and I know, in a way that makes my stomach clench, that it isn't finished. Not with me. Not with anyone who touches what the desert is trying to keep.